Thank you. So I was told to tell you about the problem. And the problem is this institution. This institution of Congress, which I think we should describe as corrupt. But by corrupt, I don't mean that they secret cash in brown paper bags among members of Congress. I don't mean Rob Blagojevich's sense of corruption. I don't mean anything illegal by describing them as corrupt. Indeed, I believe none of the behavior I criticize is illegal. Instead, I mean corruption relative to the framers' baseline of what the institution was to be. The framers of our Constitution gave us what they called a republic. But by a republic, they meant a representative democracy. And by a representative democracy, as Federalist 52 describes, they meant a democracy that would have a branch of government that would be, quote, dependent upon the people alone. So here's their model of government. They have the people, they have the government. I do my own slides. It's cool the way that bounces like that. You see? Okay. The people and the government, creating this exclusive dependency. An exclusive dependency. Here's the problem. Congress has evolved a different dependence. A dependence not so much on the people, but increasingly a dependence upon the funders. As members of Congress spend between 30 and 70% of their time raising money to get back to Congress or to get their party back to power, they develop, as any of us would, a sixth sense, a constant awareness about how what they do might affect their ability to raise money. They become, in the words of the X-Files, shape-shifters, as they constantly adjust their views, not on issues 1 to 10, but on issues 11 to 1,000, in light of what they know will raise money. Leslie Byrne, a Democrat from Virginia, describes when she came to Congress, she was told by a colleague, quote, always lean to the green. And then to clarify, she went on, he was not an environmentalist. Now the point is, this is a dependence too, but is a different and conflicting dependence from a dependence upon the people alone because, surprise, surprise, the funders are not the people. 0.26% of America, and I know you're thinking he's a lawyer, he doesn't know how to do percentages, but I really mean 0.26% of Americans give more than $200 in a congressional election. 0.05 max out to any congressional candidate. 0.01, the 1% of the 1%, give more than $10,000 in an election cycle. And my favorite statistic, 0.0000063% of America, 196 Americans, have been responsible for more than 80% of the super PAC money contributed in this election cycle so far. So the Occupy Wall Street people are so proud of their "We are the 99% slogan. Bad marketing. They are the 99.74%, or the 99.95%, or the 99.99%, or the 99.9999937%, depending upon which number you point to measure the relative lack of influence that we have because we are not these funders. Now, the Supreme Court doesn't get this yet, but they will. This is corruption. It is corruption of the dependence the framers intended. It is dependence corruption relative to their vision of how this democracy was to function. Now, some people might say, who cares what the framers thought? They didn't think women should vote. They didn't think blacks should be members of our civil society. So who cares if they had this view about the dependence upon the people alone? Well, I think we should care, because this corruption has an effect. But to show you the fact, I need to do a little bit of brainwashing here, so you excuse me as I engage in this brainwashing activity. I'm going to give you some examples that will prime the way I want you to think about this particular problem. So for many years, I worked in the area of copyright. I became an activist in copyright on October 27, 1998, when Congress passed into law a statute in honor of this great American, the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act. Okay, the Sonny Bono Act extended the term of existing copyrights by 20 years. And the question Congress was supposed to be asking as it addressed this question of extending the term of existing copyrights by 20 years was, did it advance the public good to extend the term of an existing copyright by 20 years? Now, a copyright, of course, is a monopoly we hand out to authors to give them an incentive to produce great works. But the one thing we know about an incentive is that it is prospective only. It is about creating an incentive to do something in the future. Not even the United States Congress can get George Gershwin to produce anything more. So it couldn't make any sense to extend the term of an existing copyright, and indeed so clear was that when we got 13 economists, including 5 Nobel Prize winners, to join a brief to argue in the Supreme Court that it couldn't make any sense, this liberal left-wing this is the right-wing Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, agreed he would sign the brief saying it could not advance the public good only if the word no-brainer was somewhere in the brief. So obvious was it that you couldn't advance the terms of the public by advancing the terms of an existing copyright. But apparently there were no brains in this place when Congress unanimously extended the term of existing copyrights. What there was more than $6 million in contributions from Disney and related corporations eager to advance their good, the public good, be damned. Or here's another example. Think about the collapse on Wall Street. We, of course, saw the extraordinary collapse of Wall Street that brought the whole economy down in 2008. What is it that led to that collapse? Well, in this great book by Simon Johnson and James Quack, they point to this perverse mix of both too little government and too much government. Too little government in the form of deregulation. The 1990s had seen an explosion in, quote, financial innovations, aka derivatives. But because of a series of legislative changes begun in the 1990s, these innovations were effectively invisible to the marketplace. They were not traded on public exchanges, subject to ordinary rules of fraud or transparency. They were invisible because the law allowed them to be. Now, of course, other financial assets, like stocks and bonds, are not invisible in the marketplace. They're traded on public exchanges. And so I asked a friend, a colleague, Frank Partnoy, to calculate the effect of this decision. And what he calculated was that in 1980, 98% of financial assets traded in our economy were traded in public on exchanges according to standard transparency rules and anti-fraud requirements. But by 2008, 90% of the assets traded in our economy were traded off of these public exchanges without any transparency requirement, not even with an anti-fraud requirement attached. This produced the kind of shadow banking market that encouraged the bubble, which when it burst took the whole economy down. But Quack and Johnson say that alone was not enough. In addition to this too little government, there was too much government. Throughout the 1990s, there was a clear beacon by our federal government that there was effectively a government guarantee that when this bubble burst, there would be a bailout on the other side. This is the dumbest form of socialism ever invented by man. We socialized risk, but privatized the benefit. Okay, now, this is a technical legal term, I apologize, but this is an insanely stupid way to set up the financial incentives in our financial system. And all of that stupidity was before 2008. But more striking to me is what happened after 2008, where we have the classic insult being added to injury by the work of our Congress. Because after 2008, after we'd seen the worst crisis since the Depression, after those not tied to the industry had identified the source of that crisis as in part, at least, this misregulation by our government. People on the left and people on the right. Joe Stiglitz on the left and Judge Richard Posner on the right. The only thing these two people agree on is this one idea that this misregulation was a significant cause of that crisis. After the dean of deregulation, Alan Greenspan, testified to Congress, he thought he made a mistake in believing the banks would think about the public interest rather than their own private interest. After all of that, the banks were still powerful enough to blackmail the Democrats and Republicans alike, to get a get-out-of-jail-free card for everything that happened before, and to effect no real change in the financial architecture that produced this disaster. If the banks were too big to fail in 2008, they are only too bigger to fail now. Now you look at this and you say, why? How could this be? And there are lots of possible explanations, but here's the one thing we know. The fastest growing sector of contributions of all sectors came in the financial services sector, and in 2010, the single largest sector contributing to congressional campaigns came from the financial, insurance, and real estate sector. Okay, one final example. I'm sure many of you, when you saw these horrible pictures of the Deepwater Horizon, thought to yourself, how is it such an experimental technology for drilling these deep-drilled wells could be permitted without extensive environmental impact and risk studies? After all, in our area, we've spent about 9 years and 10,000 pages of environmental impact analysis to permit the green energy project to happen now in the Cape. So exactly what was the study that was made before the Deepwater Horizon was permitted to drill in the way it drilled? And the answer is 17 pages of analysis before they were exempted from any further obligation to establish the safety of their work. Now, when Congress heard this, of course, Congress was shocked.
I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here. You're winning, sir. Oh, thank you very much. Everybody out at once.
Yet, of course, it was Congress that had required fast-track approval for these types of applications. And you ask, why did Congress require this fast-track approval? And again, the one thing we know is the endless campaign cash in the middle of this decision. Now, here's the point. No respectable liberal, libertarian, or conservative could defend these cases. Each of them is an abomination from each of these different political perspectives. So why is it they became part of our law? The political scientists are actually uncertain. They say it's complex. We can't really show a direct connection between money and results. But here's the fact. You believe you know. All I had to do was to point to the money, and you believe you know why these stupid decisions were made. You believe you know, and at the center of what you believe is this picture of this money. And that's the core I want you to recognize as my claim. Number one, Americans believe, because of cases like this, because of hundreds of cases like this, and I think Americans are right to believe this, but let's just focus on what Americans believe. Americans believe money buys results in Congress. 75% of Americans, according to a poll that we conducted for the book that I published last fall, a little bit more Democrats than Republicans, but I guarantee you before the Republicans took control of the House, there were just as many Republicans as Democrats. So whether it's 2/3 or 3/4, here is the one thing we all agree about. Money buys results in Congress, leading to point number two. That belief erodes trust in the institution of Congress. Gallup last year calculated that Congress had an 11% confidence rating. That went up, they said, to 12%, but the New York Times and ABC calculated the number was actually 9% confidence rating in the United States Congress. 9%. So close to Lexington, here in Concord, let's just reflect on this very important statistic. It's certainly the case that there were a higher percentage of Americans who believed in the British crown at the time of the Revolution than who believe in this Congress today. And that leads to point number three. This low trust erodes participation. Rock the Vote, which organizes and turns out young voters and turned out the largest number of young voters in 2008 in the history of voting, found that in 2010, a significant number of their voters were not going to turn out and vote. So they polled them, and they asked them why. And the number one reason by far, 2-to-1 over the second highest reason, was, quote, no matter who wins, corporate interest will still have too much power and prevent real change. And it's not just kids. The vast majority of Americans who could have voted in 2010 did not vote, in part at least because of this belief. Now, this is, I think, the problem. And it is the problem today, and it was the problem on January 20th, 2010. January 20th, 2010, the day before Citizens United was decided. The day before Citizens United was decided, and today, this is and this was the problem. A world where a tiny fraction of Americans fund these elections. The day before Citizens United was decided, our democracy was already broken. Citizens United might have shot the body, but the body was already cold. So the point is, it's not enough, in my view. It's not enough for us to talk about how we can flip Citizens United, reverse Citizens United. It would be a mistake for the reform movement that America needs to think that the problem we face is just a problem with the Supreme Court. And indeed, almost a stone's throw away, I'm sure there's some kids on the baseball field who could do this, but a stone's throw away from here, let's remember the words of this great author, Henry David Thoreau, writing at Walden in 1846. As Thoreau wrote, "There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil, to one who is striking at the root." Call that one the root striker. And what a root striker does is to step back from all the issues we care about and recognize that they are all linked, that there is a common reason why we will get no global warming legislation or real financial reform or real healthcare reform or sensible copyright policy or addressing our deficit. There is a common reason why. There is a root cause to this common failure. And that root cause is this corruption. It is this picture of democracy where the funders are not the people. Until we change this, until we change this fact about our democracy, we will change nothing about the substantive issues that all of us care about. Now, when Ben Franklin was carried from the Constitutional Convention in September 1787, he was stopped on the streets of Philadelphia by a woman who said, "Mr. Franklin, what have you wrought?" And Franklin said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it. A republic, a representative democracy, a government dependent upon the people alone. We have lost that republic. And we need to act now and act smartly to get it back." Thank you very much.